Hi, my name is Rhea Bhandari and I'm a volunteer at Rubaru. In this podcast, I will be discussing the topic of trauma in child sexual abuse victims. I will be speaking with Ritika, a psychological counselor who works with individuals, couples, and families. She helps them deal with a spectrum of issues including anxiety, depression, stress, relationship, and work. The aim of this conversation is to educate and spread awareness about understanding trauma in a way that listeners are able to connect and relate to. So I want to start talking a little bit about the fight, flight, freeze response. What really happens when a child who has been sexually abused experiences trauma?
Okay, so to understand the physiological responses of the body, it's good for us to understand what happens in the body when trauma occurs. The alarm system of the body goes off when we experience trauma. And of course, we have adrenaline and cortisol released in the body, which means that we have the option of fight, flight, and freeze. For most children, freeze is the go-to response. That is because they need to conserve energy. Freeze is basically like a paralysis where they are unable to move. Their body literally shuts down to conserve all the energy, so that they can flee when the time is right. Why does this happen is because if we actually were to look at the child and imagine ourselves as children for a moment, visualize yourself as a young, small child who's actually physically smaller than the perpetrator. Which means that they don't perceive themselves as strong enough as the abuser. They don't have the confidence to fight the abuser. They are confused about what's really happening. They don't understand whether this approach from the abuser is normal, not normal, why is this happening, what's wrong about it, even though they're uncomfortable about it. So they're very confused and they don't know what to do. They literally feel they can't protect themselves. And that's why the body goes into the freeze response. In this response, they can stay still, conserve their energy, and when they feel that they have the slightest chance to flee, they can flee. And that's why most kids resort to the freeze response in the body. But this is all because of facts, and facts like they are actually less powerful than the adult. They are actually smaller in stature than the adult. So there is nothing distorted about it. It's a reality which in their mind gets distorted over time. The downside of the freeze response is that it can be misinterpreted as being submissive and a total loss of control. And that's one of the things that stays with the children for a very, very long time.
I think it's important to talk about the shame and guilt feels after a child experiences trauma. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, shame and guilt are very, very important consequences of anybody who's been traumatized, especially sexual abuse. The feeling of being violated is extremely painful for the survivor. It leads to a sense of the sense of helplessness in the trauma, the sense of weakness in the trauma, the inability to control or have any control in that incident leads to feelings of being ashamed for the survivor. And that is very painful because that really attacks the core of the person. Which is what shame is attached to, the core of who you are. It's almost like having no control over undoing that action. You can't go back in time and undo anything. So shame is a very, very highly toxic emotion that affects the core of the person, and they really have no control on how to undo it. Or so they fear. Okay, so it's highly more impactful than guilt, because guilt is related to some action and a behavior. It's slightly easier to manage than shame, because you can do something there. So that means you have some kind of control in that act or that behavior. You can undo it. But when you feel ashamed about something that you had no control over, it really impacts the deep core of the survivor.
Okay.
This leads to feelings of low self-esteem. This leads to low self-esteem, low self-worth. They want to hide because they are so ashamed of who they are.
Yeah.
They want to become invisible. They don't want to interact with people. They start avoiding situations, people, events that could really trigger those kind of uncomfortable feelings in them that remind them of the trauma. So that is why it's important for us to understand what the role of shame for trauma survivors. It's huge, it's deep, it's impactful, and it takes a while for them to undo that, to regain their self-worth, their self-esteem, to really see themselves as strong enough to be able to deal and engage with life like other normal people.
Yeah. And I think also, like, in the moment, the way the body responds to the perpetrator's actions can also contribute to the shame that a child feels.
Absolutely, because when they freeze, it's a passive behavior. It's almost like thinking to yourself that you're submitting to this act. And that enhances that sense of loss of control, which magnifies the shame and the guilt.
Yeah.
It's important, that's why, for us to really understand how we can engage with trauma survivors, especially children, to make them feel comfortable or understood, to help them heal.
Yeah. So I actually know someone who was sexually abused when they were younger. And she was undergoing counseling even up till now as a 18 or 19-year-old. And she actually hid it from me and my friends. And we had no idea that she was like still undergoing counseling and, still needed help to address her trauma. And I think that really plays into the shame and guilt we were talking about earlier. She didn't really want to admit it to us that, something that happened so long ago still affected her. And we could see this in her relationships, like the way she interacted with other boys especially was very different than a typical like 18 or 19-year-old girl. And now I'm like coming to understand this because I understand the symptoms of trauma and how feelings of shame and guilt can really play in the long term. It's not something that someone can just get over, let's say, in 2 years. And I think it affects everybody differently. So in this case, she was doing really well at school, like her academics were fine, but outside the social setting, that's where it really impacted her the most.
So what did you notice about her behavior that instinctively made you feel something was not normal?
So the way she was very wary of boys at our school. The way she like interacted with them was purely on an academic basis. She wouldn't go out of her way to even be friends with them. And she was like very hesitant around them. She just wanted to be like very like kind of professional, didn't want to like let her guard down, which I thought there was just something like her personality. She was just more reserved, more of an introvert. But I realized that her trauma in the past could have been something that like shapes the way she actually interacts with people, like even now and currently.
Yes. So now you recognize when people are guarded in their interactions with the opposite sex.
Yes.
Which, and not just normally guarded, but just not with boundaries, but an unhealthy way of being guarded. Which doesn't feel normal to you.
Yeah. It unhealthy in the way that it limited her relationships. Like she would only be comfortable around girls, and ultimately, like in the long term, it's good to have friends of the opposite sex. Just like those friendships are so important. So this trauma actually limited her in that sense.
That's right. That's great. So Rhea, can you describe your relationship with this friend and what you experienced through that?
Yeah, so it took a while initially for her to like open up to me. So initially it was mostly like academic talk, things that are like superficial, like on the surface, like conversations. But after we became closer, we began to like share more things. Like I would confide in her, and like she would help me through a lot of things, give me advice. But I found that she was a bit reluctant to extend our friend group, and she wasn't very comfortable with putting herself outside her comfort zone. So her group of friends at school was quite close-knit. There were just a few girls that she was close with and was able to like talk to and was comfortable around. But other than that, that was like kind of it. She was an introverted and shy person. So anyways, it was hard for her to get out of her comfort zone. But I found that our relationship was very close. But I also like only found out about her traumatizing experience a couple years after I had known her. So yeah.
So that brings us to a really important point about the issues of trust that trauma survivors struggle with. It's pretty evident from the way that their trauma has impacted them, because they never felt safe in that trauma. They never felt secure being abused. So that loss of safety, security, a loss of control has also eroded their ability to trust others. And that is very evident in life and relationships for them, unless they do something to resolve it. So this is important for us to remember, that the reason they don't trust others easily is because of that unprocessed trauma. And they haven't really been able to confront those uncomfortable feelings and really what happened at that time for them. They are usually very hyper vigilant and in a state of hyper arousal, which really means they're always looking out for threatening cues in their environment. People who could make them feel unsafe, places that make them feel unsafe, things people say that make them feel unsafe, or things people do that can make them feel threatened.
And these could all resemble their perpetrator or be somehow associated with their perpetrator.
Absolutely. And this is all quite unconscious. They don't even recognize and make that correlation unless they sit in therapy or work with somebody to process this, to connect the dots. So what we do see in relationships is, or what do we do see in trauma survivors in relationships is extreme shyness, inhibitions to engage normally, lack of confidence, inability to trust others, which is what you experienced with your friend. Which you might have been surprised about because you thought you knew her so well, and yet there's this part of hers that never really came up. But instead now is the important question. So when something like that happens, how is it that you're going to react to that? And that's really important for us to remember. How do we react to people who've been through trauma? What can we do to make them feel safer? More respected, more important to us. Are we being dominating in our conversations with them? Are we imposing our opinions on them? Are we giving them choices and being fair with them? So these are important things for us to reflect on. Because as you can see, if you're imposing and domineering, they are going to withdraw. It's reminding them of the trauma. They don't feel safe and secure. But if you are respecting them, giving them choices, asking them for what they want, giving them a sense of control back in their life, you're helping them build trust in that relationship with you.
Especially because their perpetrator would have been in a position of authority or dominance. So if you are interacting with them and you show those same qualities, that will just bring up triggering memories.
Absolutely.
So those kind of things have to be avoided, and I think that's why giving them choices is so important. So they don't have to resort to that freeze response and feel like they need to flee in the moment. They feel more secure and more comfortable. Like there's no level of authority, they're on the same level as the person they're interacting with.
So validating their actions, their emotions, giving them choices, letting them choose and make their own decisions, and pacing it out.
Yeah.
While letting them know that you're still there and that you're not going to run away from that relationship.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah.
That's respect. That I understand what you've gone through. I'm here. And I will still be here. Take your time.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to show them that the way they're feeling is not abnormal or is not wrong.
Absolutely.
For example, everyone copes with grief differently, and everyone copes with trauma differently. So, for example, if they're ashamed about something and they haven't told anyone, you shouldn't make them feel bad about it. You shouldn't say you should have told me, I would have helped you. You have to understand that what they're going through is something personal. And because I didn't know about my friend's incident for 2 years, I don't want to make her feel bad about that. I understand that she felt like because of her situation, her trust levels are very different to what a normal person's might be.
Yes.
And the fact that she didn't want to share that she was going to counseling and was having therapy sessions was something that she should be ashamed of. That's completely okay.
Yes, so that's what validation is. And that's really important. So to summarize it, building trust in that relationship, whether it's your child, whether it's somebody you know in the family, is really important.
Yeah.
How you do it is by respecting them, giving them choices, validating them, being there and not imposing on them at the same time, allowing them their own pace to heal and recover.
So I want to talk a little bit about how sexual abuse is seen in today's society, and actually a lot of this is to do with gender stereotypes and how they're perceived by all of us. So I know that when we think of sexual abuse, we always think of a woman or a girl as the victim and a male as a perpetrator. But actually, there's a much higher percentage of men that have been sexually abused that we don't even know about or we're not aware of. So I know that women are supposed to be seen as weak or submissive or dependent on somebody, whereas men are supposed to be, they're not supposed to show their emotions. They're supposed to be independent and powerful and dominant and ambitious and kind of these whole positions of authority compared to women.
Right.
So I just want to discuss a little bit about how this affects their lives in the future and kind of what differences we see between men and women.
Yes, and that's very interesting. Because what you'll see happening is whilst women can become afraid of sexual intimacy in the future, because it's a very scary place for them to be in, they may have low self-esteem and everything else along with that. In men, what you'll notice is complete suppression of emotions, almost a numb-like state.
Yeah.
In their relationships, they are completely emotionally unavailable to their spouses, family members, or any other engagement in relationships, because that's coming from exactly what you said, the stereotype conditioning of what men should be like, which means that the message they have is, I can deal with anything, I'm a man, I don't give in to emotions, that's something for women to do. So that means whatever the trauma may be, it's not bigger than me, I can repress it and suppress it. And I don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't need help to talk about this.
Yeah.
What this translates into is, though they may be doing very well professionally and achieving high standards there, in their personal relationships, there is a vacuum, emotional vacuum.
Okay.
So they could be having physical connections with their spouse, but it lacks emotional connection.
Yeah.
And that's pretty evident and leads to a rocky relationship at some point in many relationships, because you feel disconnected at the end of the day.
And I think that this gender stereotype, this whole thing needs to be taught to especially young boys and girls about how they can be broken, because these are ultimately perceptions that are formed when they are younger, because that's all they know, and then they take that with them as they grow older, and then it starts to affect serious relationships in the future.
Yes.
So breaking gender stereotypes is really important for young kids.
Yes.
Especially when they've been sexually abused, because then sometimes boys feel like they can't talk about it. They're ashamed because they think that I should have been able to do something in this situation because I'm supposed to be dominant, I'm supposed to be powerful.
Yes.
Why didn't I do anything?
Absolutely.
And girls feel like, should I even be able to stand up? Like, I'm perceived as a submissive, weak person. So then all these like stereotypes play into the way that they react and the way they deal with trauma in the future.
And that's very true, because they become extremely reactive, very, very angry, impulsively angry, with no ability to emotionally regulate themselves.
Yeah.
Something they don't even understand where it might be stemming from.
Yeah.
But it's all that suppressed, unprocessed emotion around trauma that leads to this kind of a behavior, to which is subjected their entire family, their spouse, their kids, their other family members, maybe people at work. So they have problems with anger, behavioral problems, inability to empathize with people.
Yeah.
They really are very rational and live in their heads rather than make that connection.
So they find it hard to connect with people that are because they feel that they can't relate to those people because they've gone through all this trauma.
Yes.
It's kind of living in their head. They're having nightmares, flashbacks. It's constantly on their mind. So that's kind of, they're very like reactive to everything, like you said. The smallest thing can be a trigger.
Yes. And the sad part is that most people are unaware about it because of gender stereotype.
Yeah.
And unprocessing things and keeping them safely tucked away under the carpet.
Because they feel like they're supposed to act in a certain way because of these stereotypes. If they diverge from this norm, something is wrong. They feel they have to kind of like show themselves in a certain way.
Exactly. So it would be really nice if we could destigmatize trauma.
Yeah.
And also learn to uncondition our boys from the gender stereotypes that we have today. Would help free them up, free their emotions. Whilst of course we are doing all this work with women simultaneously, but it would be really great if we could focus on that as well and allow them the freedom to express themselves, to really be who they are, and not just the Me Too movement.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting and very helpful.
You're very welcome. I'm glad we could engage on this topic today.
Thank you.